Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and today we're going to take a look at one of the most hotly contested price points and positions in FPL this year, the 5.5 million midfielders. There's tons of great options, and I'm trying today not to sit on the fence and pick out the very best of them for you. In the meantime, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated. For now though, let's crack on with the show. Right then, so before we get started, a quick mention for my mini league. It is live and I'd love it if you could get involved before the game week 1 deadline. The code is RQ7NIR. Just put that in on the Fantasy Premier League website and then you're in. And as always, all of the data on this show today is provided by Fantasy Football Hub. If you did want 50% off, the link is in the description below. I believe that finishes on the game week 1 deadline, so do click that link if you want to get involved before we lock in our teams ahead of game week 1. For now though, let's start off with one of the most popular picks right now in this price point. Only 4.9% owned overall, but I think a lot of the managers in the community are on Callum Hudson-Odoi, and looking at the fixtures, especially the opening 3, you can see why. So Bournemouth, Southampton away from home, then Wolves at home in the opening 3. It's a great set to start off the season. And Nottingham Forest did look good under Nuno Espirito Santo at the back end of last season. Good underlying data, especially from a defensive point of view, but not too bad from an attacking point of view either. Now, Callum Hudson-Odoi is a player that at the very beginning, he was one of my favourite picks at 5.5, but I'm starting to go off of him slightly. Now, the reason for that is I've started digging into the data a little bit more, and this XG and XA per 90, combining to an XGI per 90 of 0.23, is just not that fantastic. That's an expected goal return, so either goal or an assist, in 1 in every 4 matches if he plays 90 minutes consistently. He is one of the favoured picks at the moment, so I don't want to overlook him completely, but I'm really trying not to sit on the fence in this video. And whilst the opening 3 game weeks are good, the next 2 after that, Liverpool and Brighton, both away from home, not absolutely amazing. And honestly, I just don't think the data is good enough that I am willing to use up one of my 5.5 million midfielder spots on Hudson-Odoi at this point. Now, one thing to note is he does often overperform that expected goal threat, obviously getting 8 goals, a lot of them from relatively low XG chances last season. So I don't think he's necessarily a bad pick, and he will be pretty solid for minutes this season. But unless he significantly improves on this underlying data, I just have this gut feeling that there are going to be better options out there at this price point. And again, I don't want to be one of those YouTubers that just sits on the fence with every single pick. I don't hate him, but he's not one of my preferred options at this price point at the moment. And I think some of the other ones I do prefer in this video. So a player who has had an electric preseason is Jacob Murphy, and I don't think too many managers were looking at him before preseason kicked off and got going, but he has looked very, very sharp down that right wing for Newcastle. And honestly, I wasn't really expecting him to get the sort of minutes that he has done in pre-season. The underlying data last season also isn't too shabby either. Better than Hudson-Odoi's in both regards. So 0.17 XG per 90 and 0.25 XA per 90. That's pretty decent. It's tallied obviously together to create 0.42. For a 5.5 million asset, that's pretty good if he gets 90 minutes. And I think that's the thing I really want to focus on here with Jacob Murphy. I think at the start of the season, he looks likely to start at right wing, but does that mean he's going to get 90 minutes each week? I think that's very, very unlikely, especially as the game weeks progress. Gordon has come back late to pre-season, and Barnes has so far been starting on the left wing, but you'd imagine that both of them are talented enough that they're not just going to take minutes off of each other at left wing, they're also going to be competing at right wing as well for a few minutes. Now, that might mean that Murphy starts the season as a starting right winger, but he'll almost certainly only get 60, 70 minutes a game with Barnes or Gordon coming on for him at right wing. You'd expect Barnes is more likely because Gordon is the better pick at left wing. Now, not only that, but there are also rumours circulating that Madueke from Chelsea might be signing for Newcastle in the coming days as well. Obviously, keep your eye on that because that's not confirmed, just a rumour at this point. But what it does say to me is that Newcastle are definitely in the market for boosting that right wing spot and having options there. So all of this comes together to mean that I don't think Murphy is that secure for minutes. And whilst the upside is there, especially very, very differential at only 1% ownership, and of course the fixtures look fantastic for Newcastle, I, again, just don't want to sit on the fence here. I don't think he's going to be a reliable pick for the long term. And even in the very, very short term, I still don't think he's going to be getting 80, 90 minutes a match. I think he'll come off relatively early and then possibly be a threat for losing his starting position around game week 2, 3, 4. So honestly, again, I just don't think I could highly recommend him. He could be a fantastic option if I'm wrong and he does get those minutes. But again, I just don't really feel it at the moment. I don't think he's going to get the minutes that we need to make him one of the better 5.5 million options. Obviously, he could still pop off in 60 minutes or even in 30 minutes with this sort of data. So you never know. It could work out. I'm not going to try and tell anyone don't go for him. But in terms of what I'm looking for a player that's going to get 70, 80, 90 minutes a match and has the data to back it up as well. And I just don't know if Murphy's that guy for me right now. So one player that I am pretty keen on and have been bigging up in recent videos is Ben Brereton-Diaz. Now, I've spoken about him previously in videos, so if you want to go back and see a more elaborate version of this speech, then by all means, please feel free to do so. But at 0.3% ownership and at 5.5 million, I think he could be one of the underrated bargain gems in midfield right now. Signed for Southampton, so obviously going to be a struggling club in the Premier League, although I think it's probably fair to say that hopefully we won't struggle just as much as Sheffield United did last season. And he got this sort of underlying data and goal return in half a season at Sheffield United. Played out of position for them, and will probably be playing out of position for Southampton as well. 0.45 XG per 90 for a player who's a midfielder at 5.5 million is absolutely fantastic. And if you cast your mind back to the start of the video when I was talking about Hudson-Odoi, his was 0.13 per 90. So it's over 3 times the goal threat per 90 minutes for Ben Brereton-Diaz. And I do think he'll get 80, 90 minutes a match most game weeks. He's come in as one of our standout players and is already getting decent minutes in pre-season. And even if we play a back 5, it looks like he will play up top alongside Adam Armstrong instead of one of the two even. If we play a 4-3-3, it looks like he might be playing either on the left wing, cutting inside, almost an inside forward at that point, or centre forward, where at the moment we honestly don't have a lot of options there either. So I think this sort of underlying data will be matched, if not slightly better this season at Southampton than it was under Sheffield United regime that were really struggling to create chances. So overall, I really like him. Got decent fixtures to start the season after game week 1 especially. I don't think he's necessarily the best 5.5 million asset, but he is a differential that I'd be strongly considering going into game week 1, especially if some of the other players I'm about to recommend, you've got coverage in attacking spots from other positions in those teams' lineups, if that makes sense. So Ben Brereton-Diaz is definitely a player that I would not disregard at 5.5. I prefer him to Murphy and to Callum Hudson-Odoi at this point in time, especially based on the underlying attacking threat and combining the expected minutes. Another 5.5 million asset I'm really keen on at the moment is Yankuba Minteh. I have spoken about him a little bit recently, but just as a reminder, this underlying data is absolutely fantastic. Now, it does come from the Eredivisie, but it's still absolutely phenomenal for a 5.5 million midfielder, and it looks like he's going to be locked in at right wing for Brighton in a fairly attacking lineup. Now, they do have options there. So they've got the likes of Solly March, they've got Mitoma on the other wing, they've got Adingra as well. They've even got Enciso coming back in, who often plays more centrally, but could be pushed out wide, as could João Pedro as well. So it's not like he's not competing for a spot there, but he's played so well in pre-season, looked so electric, that I kind of think that it's his spot to lose at the moment. And when you've got data like this, even coming from a weaker division, you still expect it to convert relatively well to the Premier League. And honestly, even if this data was cut in half, for a 5.5 million midfielder, it's still good value for money. So I really like the look of Yankuba Minteh. There is a very slight doubt with X minutes because there's a lot of different options that could play there. But given how well he's played in pre-season and how much Hurtzler has favoured him at right wing so far, I'd be absolutely stunned if he didn't start game week 1 against Everton away from home at right wing. And then again, I really think it's his spot to lose at this point in time. So a player I'm very keen on, ultra differential at this point in time, and I would put him one rank higher than Ben Brereton-Diaz, especially with that underlying attacking threat that is on screen now. So if I was forced into a decision today, I think the 5.5 million midfielder of choice for me right now would probably be this man on screen. Emile Smith-Rowe got his move to Fulham. Obviously at Arsenal never really got the minutes, but when he did, especially near the start of Arteta's regime, was very, very good on the underlying data. And even in limited minutes for Arsenal last season, as you can see on screen, very positive underlying data too. But we should take that with a pinch of salt because a limited sample size is not necessarily reliable. However, already in pre-season at Fulham, he's been getting really good minutes. He's scored in both of the pre-season games that he's played in and has been played or deployed in a very advanced role just behind the striker, behind Rodrigo Muniz, for example, in those pre-season friendlies. I really couldn't rate him highly enough here. 6.2% ownership. That has taken a bit of a jump since he got this move for obvious reasons. But I think the main worry about Smith-Rowe is the injury doubt. He's had a pretty awful record with injuries in recent seasons, but it seems to me that the injury in question was more of an isolated incident that just kept rolling on and rolling on and rolling on. He had surgery on that, and it looks like it could be a complete thing of the past now. So I have a gut feeling on Smith-Rowe that he is going to be a breakout star this season. He's at a club that I think suits him down to the ground. He'll be one of the talismanic figures there. He'll be absolutely adored by the fans. He'll be one of their most important players. And the X minutes, as long as he stays fit, which again, I see no reason why he couldn't, should be really, really strong. Now, what this means for other players in the 11, I'll go on to in just a moment's time. But if he plays in that central CAM role, in that number 10 role in behind the striker, this underlying data is going to be fantastic. And the fixtures to start off the season is maybe the ace up his sleeve right now. Man United away from home, maybe not ideal, but their underlying defensive data was awful last season, so definitely not something to be afraid of. And then 2 promoted clubs back-to-back in Game Week 2 and Game Week 3, followed by West Ham at home under new management, then Newcastle at home after that. Overall, as a set of 5, it's really, really strong. And I think if you're not going with Muniz up top, having that Fulham attack represented by Smith-Rowe is a very wise idea. Now, there's always space for a little bit of a gamble in your starting 11, or at least in your 8th attacking spot. And I think, honestly, Smith-Rowe could be that guy right now. I absolutely love him. I think he's got the attacking data. He's got the X-Mins, as long as he stays fit, of course. And he's got the fixtures. So for me, he's probably my favoured 5.5 million midfielder at this point in time. That doesn't mean that he's the safest, though. So let's discuss another one right now. So the final one I want to focus on in its entirety would be Andreas Pereira. And that's because he's probably the safer version of the Fulham 5.5 million midfielder if you wanted to go that way. If you wanted someone that is almost certainly going to get 80 plus minutes every single week, has a very good track record when it comes to injury, and is still very differential at under 5% ownership, Andreas is probably your guy. The data is not as good as Smith-Rowe, it's not as good as Minteh, and it's not as good as Ben Brereton-Diaz, but it is slightly better than the likes of Callum Hudson-Odoi, for instance, and I think over the first 5 game weeks, it's a good run of fixtures still. So I think it's probably slightly better than the Nottingham Forest options, if a little bit dull. The reason it is a bit dull is because his attacking threat is probably nullified a little bit by the signing of Smith-Rowe. It looks like he's going to drop a little bit deeper this season to accommodate Smith-Rowe in that starting 11, but I don't think that completely ruins him as an asset. It is going to be a little bit boring, but he should keep penalties. He should keep a lot of the set pieces. So I think this data is pretty okay for a 5.5 million midfielder, and the minutes are very, very strong. We know, for instance, that analytical managers are really hot on him at the moment. He might take a little bit of a dive in the ratings because of the new role, I still don't think it's going to be a terrible pick. So if you were tempted by the Fulham fixtures, but you were a little bit cautious on Smith-Rowe's injury record, then maybe Andreas Pereira is the man to go for. All right then, so I've taken a look at some of my favourite picks in isolation one by one. Now let's have a look at some of the other contenders that I definitely don't want to completely overlook in this video, because they all have merits and they could be an option for you. So I don't want to disregard them and say that they're not good options, because they could absolutely still be good options. So let's start off from the top. Semenyo is a player that's definitely starting to creep into my thoughts, especially because Solanke has now moved to Tottenham. Semenyo could be in line for a starting centre-forward slot for Bournemouth. For what it's worth, I still think it's more likely that he plays slightly in behind the striker and either Unal or Jebison takes up that centre-forward role. But Semenyo did start up top for Bournemouth in his most recent pre-season friendly, and the expected points over the first 5 game weeks is the strongest of any of the other contenders here on the board. The underlying attacking data, whilst not amazing, is also not terrible, especially from a goal threat of basically an expected goal in 1 in every 5 games in the Premier League. That should increase a little bit if we take into account the fact that Solanke's gone and they're going to need to compensate for that. Semenyo's got a lot of the attributes that Solanke had physically and in terms of the eye for goal and in terms of the footballing intelligence. So I do think he stands a good chance of filling in that slot when it comes to replacing some of the goals that Solanke is probably going to take with him to Tottenham. The fixtures aren't great though, so I think it's maybe one to just wait on, and we can maybe use the first few game weeks to see whether or not he does take that centre forward role and has an increased goal threat. Now, looking down the sheet a little bit, Kamada could be an option at Crystal Palace. Comes with decent goal threat and decent attacking threat overall, but probably not the best on this spreadsheet. 0.5% owned, so he's the most differential of the bunch here. But it is worth noting that none of these are above 3% ownership, so all of them are pretty differential. So I wouldn't just go with Kamada for the sake of it, although he does come highly rated and he will be filling in the old Elise spot at Palace. So he could be a differential that might be worth targeting, especially considering the opening 5 game weeks with a fixture rank of 3 on the Hub's ticker. Now that is based on the attacking fixtures, so again, maybe a decent option, although probably not one of my favourites. Moving on to 2 of the promoted midfielders at 5.5, Mavididi and Hutchinson both come in with good goal threat overall, 0.23 and 0.22 XG per 90 respectively, and almost identical assist threat as well at 0.22 and 0.21 respectively. It is worth noting that Leicester have much better fixtures from an attacking point of view than Ipswich do, 20th on the ticker, so maybe in Hutchinson's case especially, it's worth just waiting and seeing how well this attacking threat translates to Premier League football. With Mavididi as well, I think it is probably worth saying that there are preferred options at the moment, although if you wanted a differential upside pick with decent goal threat, maybe he's an option that you shouldn't disregard. And again, we're talking about our 7th or 8th midfielder or attacker overall here. So Mavididi might be that differential option with upside that could set you apart from the template. And again, he could pop off. He could be an absolute breakout star. So you just never know. However, for me, I think there are better options out there overall. Now, a quick word on Elanga. He is a differential option. He is another Nottingham Forest midfielder, a bit like Hudson-Odoi, coming in at 5.5 with decent underlying data, 0.23 and 0.15 in terms of XG and XA per 90. That is actually better than Hudson-Odoi, so maybe you can make a case for saying he's the better option, but I just don't think his minutes are as secure as Hudson-Odoi's. I think that sometimes when Forest are playing away from home or they're playing stronger opposition, they can sometimes sacrifice the likes of one of their wingers and maybe play the other one. And I think Elanga is probably quite likely to lose out on the minutes or get substituted early in some of the tougher fixtures. That's not to say that that could change this season. It could, of course, be a bit different. He could be one of the preferred options. But again, for me, I just don't think the fixtures or the underlying data is good enough to take that risk when some of the players I've mentioned have almost double the goal threat in the first 5 game weeks with the fixtures included as well. The final player to mention is McNeil. I just don't think the goal threat is good enough for me to consider him one of my preferred options, but I have seen a few drafts out there with him as a rotatable option with other players that maybe have convenient fixtures that match well with Everton's. Now, overall, I don't really love the rotations, especially when McNeil is a part of that. I just don't know if the goal threat is strong enough. Yes, the assist threat is the best on this spreadsheet, but again, I just think that overall there are better attacking options at this price point, and I just, quite frankly, don't want to sit on the fence here. Again, none of these players are bad picks. That's why I've included them all in this spreadsheet. But I've just got to give my honest opinion on all of them. And overall, I think if I was to be told I need to make a decision right now, I think Smith-Rowe comes out marginally on top. I'd put Minteh as number 2, and then Ben Brereton-Diaz probably as my 3rd favourite option right now. So let me know in the comments below who your favoured midfield 5.5 options are. Maybe give me your top 3 as well, like I've just described to you. That would be absolutely fantastic. In the meantime, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed today's content. It would be really greatly appreciated. And I look forward to seeing you again as we really ramp up the prep for game week 1 ahead of the deadline on Friday.